And that's what he had. Um, and when I talked to him that day, I walked in the room, and he seemed like he has been through a lot. I mean, obviously, and he had been. And the one thing I kind of wanted to do at the very beginning when I met him was try to give him a little positivity, give him a little light, see the silver lining, and I know that's a very difficult thing to do. And maybe it even seemed overzealous at the time, but it just was important to me, because I know that how important positivity is in healing. And the same way depression and stress can lead to disease, positivity can lead to healing. So that was very important to me.
So can we expand quickly on the regimen that you had thought about and wanted to, I don't think the word is experiment, but give it a go, that was not, especially early on in COVID, was not a popular thing to do. Expand on what you did with the steroids,
Sure.
with the medicine.
Sure. Yeah. So back in March, when COVID first came about, like all diseases, we don't know much about them. And to be honest, I think today we still don't know much about COVID. I think that the more you know, the more you don't know. And I think that if anybody tells you they do know, they just don't know, but so in March, the recommendation was against steroids. It essentially said that the steroids worsen the condition. And I just have a kind of a theory of why this might be. Basically, when you get COVID or any type of viral infection, you have your immune system that has to react. And there's two types of immune system. There's your innate immunity, which is kind of like your frontline defense. Think about it as like the guards, and then you have your adaptive immunity, which is kind of like your cyber intelligence and stuff, which kind of remembers diseases for what they are. The innate immunity has to have its ability to react, and maybe the steroids early on were not allowing that. But ultimately, what we were seeing is that people would do, they would have kind of the same path in the first several days of getting the infection. And a lot of people seemed like they would get better or get a lot worse. And that a lot worse lasted a lot longer for certain people. And we know that as you age, your adaptive immunity, which is the smarter of the two immune systems, it doesn't work as cohesively or properly as it should. And sometimes it can get out of control, and that's what we've been seeing with COVID. So I think that for him, what ultimately happened was his adaptive immunity went out of control, and it damaged his lungs, and it laid a lot of inflammatory fluids and tissue down. Now, it's important to remember that none of this was scar tissue. And that's an important difference. Fibrosis and scarring are irreversible conditions. Now, inflammatory fluid and inflammatory tissue, it's not irreversible. It's not permanent. And that's a key thing that I remembered that made me think that we have to keep fighting for him. We cannot think about hospice care. We cannot think about end-of-life care, because we know physiologically it takes months for lungs to become fibrotic. That means that what was going on in his lungs, although it did encompass 90% of his lungs, he had very little healthy lung tissue when I started, but it still was reversible. And because it's inflammation, I thought steroids should do the trick, because steroids, they decrease your immune response. So what I did was I looked at his regimen. He had received steroids early on, but at a very low dose, which is the standard of care, because now months later after March, the NIH and the WHO, they are recommending steroids as the standard of care. But for him, I thought of giving him a much higher dose of steroids. So we did trial that. I discussed it with him, and I said, ultimately, just to give you guys numbers, he essentially received the equivalent of 40 milligrams of steroids daily when I came onto service. I talked to him about increasing that to what I thought is the maximal dose of 900 milligrams of steroids. I was basically shutting down his immune system. And it's important because we had to rule out a couple of other things to make sure he didn't have an infection elsewhere that could have taken over now that we were shutting his immune system down. And I think it was the positivity that we talked about the first day that I walked in there, and I told him, Pat, you have to be positive. You have to self-heal, and you have to be open to receiving the healing, and in order for this to work. And I think that conversation allowed him to give this a shot, because maybe if we did not have this conversation, he would have said, look, just leave me be, let me be comfortable, I'm done with the struggle. But that positivity, that conversation we had, allowed us to try a new medical therapy. And sure enough, it worked wonders. And you know, today he's on 2 liters, down from 40 liters of flow, and he was able to walk in his room, which he wasn't even able to reach for a piece of food without feeling short of breath. So I think that you know, God, it worked, and we did a great thing. And you know, I give him all the credit, because he was able to convince himself to try something new and start a new chapter. And I think that positivity was important.